The valley had always been silent, but on that cold morning it felt strangely heavier, as if the air itself was carrying a secret. The research team had been walking for hours, moving through thick bushes, loose rocks, and long dry grass that brushed against their legs. They had come to this place to study unusual ground patterns that had appeared in the area weeks earlier. The locals had been talking about strange lights in the sky at night, loud humming sounds, and animals suddenly disappearing without a trace. Most people refused to enter the valley anymore. Even the bravest herders stayed away. The team, however, had a different kind of curiosity. They wanted answers. So they kept walking deeper into the valley, using their maps, cameras, and notebooks. The sun was hidden behind thin clouds, giving everything a dull silver glow. The wind was light but cold, and it carried a faint smell of burned soil. The kind you notice after something extremely hot has touched the ground. One of the researchers raised a hand, signaling the others to stop. There, between the dried bushes, something was lying on the ground. At first, it looked like a shadow or a pile of stones. But the closer they moved, the more their hearts tightened. It wasn't stones. It was a leopard, a mother leopard. Her body was thin, almost skeletal. Her breathing was shallow. Her eyes were dull, as if they were losing their light. And beside her were two tiny cubs, curled against her stomach, trying to drink milk that she clearly didn't have anymore. Their small bodies trembled with weakness. Their meows were soft, barely noticeable in the quiet valley. The team froze, not out of fear, but out of shock. Leopards were strong, skilled, powerful creatures. Seeing one in such a helpless condition felt unreal. One researcher slowly moved closer, making sure not to panic the animal. But the mother didn't even try to attack. She only lifted her head for a moment, looked at them with a tired expression, and rested it back down on the dirt. There was something strange around her. The ground wasn't normal. The soil was darkened, almost black, as if it had been burned. Some rocks nearby looked melted, not cracked or broken, but melted, like icy shapes left near a fire. The smell became stronger the closer they came. The team exchanged confused looks. Something had happened here, and it wasn't natural. The leopard tried to move her paw, maybe to push her cubs closer to her belly, but she barely managed to lift it. Each movement looked painful. Her ribs stuck out. Her tail was limp. Her fur showed patches of rough texture, like she had been pushed against something harsh, or maybe dragged across the ground. One researcher whispered, "She hasn't eaten in days." Another added quietly, "Maybe weeks." None of them could understand how such a powerful animal ended up here in this state. Leopards usually hide when weak. They choose caves, thick bushes, or rocky ledges. They don't sit out in the open like this, unless something has gone very, very wrong. The team spread out to inspect the surrounding area. They found deep marks in the soil, not paw marks, not claw marks, something else. Long curved patterns, as if a massive smooth object had scraped the ground. Some of the bushes were flattened in perfect circular shapes. And right behind the leopard was a crater-like hole, as if something huge and extremely heavy had landed there and then vanished. The hole wasn't like a natural sinkhole. The edges were too even, too clean, almost precise. One researcher ran a hand across the ground and felt leftover heat rising. Even though days had passed since the villagers saw strange lights over the valley, the soil was still warm. Something powerful had happened here. The team moved back toward the leopard. The mother raised her head again when she saw them approach, but instead of growling, she released a weak breath and closed her eyes again. She wasn't scared of them. She didn't even have the strength for fear. Her cubs were trying to stand, but their legs wobbled and gave out immediately. One tried to crawl toward the mother's face, but it collapsed halfway and meowed softly, a sound so fragile but the entire team felt a painful tug in their chest. The mother leopard heard it. Somehow, despite her exhaustion, she gathered the strength to nudge her cub with her nose, pulling it closer inch by inch. Even in her weakest moment, she was trying to be a mother. The researchers realized she had been fighting for days. Maybe she had been abandoned. Maybe she had been trapped here. Maybe something had frightened away her food sources. Whatever the reason, she was now at the edge of death. One of the team members whispered, "If we leave them here, they won't survive today." Another nodded, "But why is she here? What scared her? What did this?" No one had an answer, but all of them felt something was wrong. This valley wasn't just quiet. It was holding a memory, a heavy one. The strange patterns, the melted stones, the heat in the soil. They didn't match anything known. And the local stories about bright shapes in the sky and animals acting differently began to feel less like myths and more like warnings. The team gathered around the leopard again. They talked softly, trying not to make sudden movements. Some took notes. Some took slow, careful pictures, not for any dramatic reason, but to understand the situation later. But most of them just watched the leopard family in silent concern. The mother leopard tried to push herself up again. Her muscles trembled. Her front paws shook violently. She managed to lift her head higher, but then her body collapsed and she fell sideways. Her cubs cried softly and tried to crawl toward her. The valley echoed with their tiny sounds. A moment passed before the mother moved again. She dragged her body slightly so her cubs could reach her. She couldn't hunt, couldn't stand, couldn't fight. But she still tried to be what her cubs needed. She refused to give up. The researchers felt something shift inside them. They weren't just looking at an animal. They were witnessing a mother's last fight for her family. One of them whispered, "Someone did this to her." Another answered quietly, "Something." The wind blew again, carrying dust across the ground, and for a second, the valley looked even more unsettling. The ground markings stretched farther than they had noticed at first. Some symbols carved into a stone nearby were unlike anything traditional or natural. Not ancient markings, not human-made carvings, something else entirely. Still, the team focused on the leopard. The cubs had curled against her once more. They were losing energy fast. Time was running out. The team knew that whatever had caused this scene, whatever had marked the earth and scared the valley silent, that was a mystery they could study later. But right now, 3 lives were hanging by a thread, and leaving them behind wasn't an option. Not one researcher gently placed a hand near the mother leopard, testing her reaction. She didn't move away. She didn't growl. Her eyes half opened, as if she understood they were not there to harm her. As if she was tired of fighting alone, the team exchanged glances. The decision was made. This was no longer about research. This was a rescue, and it began right there. In that quiet valley where something strange had happened, something powerful enough to leave even the strongest creature helpless. The mother leopard and her cubs needed help, and the team was ready to give whatever they could. The team returned to the valley early the next morning, but the silence felt different now. The first day they had come for research. Today they came with a purpose. They carried water bottles, blankets, emergency food for animals, and whatever little equipment they could arrange overnight. None of them had slept properly. The image of the weak leopard and her cubs stayed in their minds like a heavy-weight dot as they walked between the rocks and bushes. They kept looking around. The valley was big and open, yet something about it always felt like it was watching them. The burned smell was still in the air, but fainter than yesterday. The ground still looked odd, with dark patches and patterns that had no explanation. Before reaching the exact spot, they slowed down. They didn't want to frighten the animals. The morning sun was rising from behind the hills, sending long shadows across the valley. A soft wind blew dust around, giving everything a faded look, like an old forgotten place. Thought they finally saw the mother leopard. She was exactly where they had left her, barely moving, guarding her cubs even though she had almost no strength left. Her eyes opened slightly when she heard footsteps, but she didn't growl. Instead, she looked almost relieved. Maybe she remembered them. Maybe she simply sensed they were there to help. The cubs were curled tightly against her body, their tiny noses pressed into her fur, searching for comfort. Their breaths were weak, slow, and tired. It was painful to watch. They were too young to survive on their own. In normal conditions, cubs relied on their mother for everything. But here, the mother herself was fighting for life. One team member slowly sat on the ground, keeping a safe distance. Another placed a container of water nearby, hoping the mother might reach toward it. They didn't touch her yet. They wanted her to feel calm. The mother leopard lifted her head a little, noticed the water, and tried to move toward it. Her muscles tensed, but her body barely shifted. She managed to stretch her tongue out and lick the water only once before dropping her head again. That one small movement showed how dehydrated and exhausted she was. One researcher whispered, "She's given everything to keep her cubs alive." Another replied softly, "And she has nothing left for herself." The team felt helpless for a moment. They wanted to rush forward, hold the cubs, give the mother water, take them all to safety. But they knew a wild animal, even a weak one, could panic easily. Stress could harm her even more. So they worked slowly. As they observed the land again, something caught their attention. The strange symbols etched into the stones weren't random. They formed a pattern, almost like a trail. The melted rocks, the circular burn marks, the perfectly round edges in the ground, none of it fit any natural explanation. Local villagers had mentioned bright shapes in the sky, but nobody trusted those stories at first. People often use imagination to explain things they don't understand. But seeing this valley now, the research team knew something unusual had happened. And whatever it was, it affected the wildlife first. One researcher walked toward a stone with deep markings. They weren't carved with tools. They looked as if something extremely sharp and hot had sliced through the rock. Lines were smooth, curved, and almost glowing under sunlight. The ground around that area had blackened grass and ash-like dust. The team exchanged worried glances. None of this was ordinary. Suddenly they heard a soft whining sound. They turned back to the leopard. One of the cubs was trying to stand again. Its legs shook badly, but it kept pushing itself up. It looked determined, almost desperate. It wanted to move closer to its mother's face, maybe to nuzzle her, maybe to feel safer. But halfway through, the cub fell sideways and let out a tiny, weak cry. The mother leopard tried to respond. She dragged her paw slowly until it touched the cub. She then pulled the cub close to her body. Even now, half conscious, she was protecting them. That simple scene made the teen's eyes sting. This mother wasn't giving up. She was fighting silently, using whatever energy she had left. One researcher murmured, "She's been through something we don't understand." Another answered quietly, "And she still protects her cubs." The teen realized they had very little time. If they waited too long, the cubs wouldn't survive. The mother might not either. They needed to act, but carefully. They spread out the blanket they brought, moving slowly and gently. They placed it at a distance first, letting the mother see everything. Then they moved closer, inch by inch. Wildlife rescue required patience. Even a dying animal could panic. They wanted her to trust them. The mother watched them through half-open eyes. Her breathing was slow and heavy. Her ears twitched now and then, not in fear, but as if she was trying to stay awake for her cubs. The team placed a bit of emergency food for the cubs on the blanket. along with another small bowl of water. They wouldn't force anything on the animals. They just wanted them to have a chance. As they worked, they kept seeing more signs around the valley. Broken branches, but not in a natural pattern. Scorch marks that circled trees. Perfectly round indentations in the soil. Things no animal or human could have made. One of the researchers, who had been studying the marks, returned with a tense face and spoke softly so the leopard wouldn't feel alarmed. Whatever happened here, it was not natural. The ground looked struck by something extremely hot. Another replied, just as quietly. And the mother leopard was here when it happened. They stood silently for a moment, absorbing the weight of those words. Then something else caught their attention. Farther in the valley, there was a large patch of grass that had turned silver, almost metallic, as if it had been exposed to some kind of unknown energy. The grass wasn't burned. It wasn't wilted. It was transformed in a strange way. That sight made their skin crawl. The valley seemed normal on the outside, but every detail hinted at something unusual. Still, the team reminded themselves that their first duty was the animals. They approached the mother leopard again, slow and gentle. One researcher spoke softly. "We want to help. Please stay calm." The mother blinked, her eyes heavy but aware. She didn't move aggressively. She simply watched them, her body too weak for anything else. Finally, one of the researchers moved the blanket closer to the cubs. The cubs didn't react at first. They were too weak. But when the blanket touched their fur, they stirred slightly, sensing the warmth. The mother didn't protest. She just kept her eyes on them, as if she was giving permission. One researcher gently lifted the first cub, supporting its tiny body carefully. The cub was so light, almost weightless. Its fur was soft but cold. It let out a faint meow. The mother leopard raised her head a little, worried, but when she saw the researcher lowering the cub onto the warm blanket, she relaxed again. Then they lifted the second cub. This one was even weaker. It didn't make a sound. The team moved quickly but gently, placing it beside its sibling. Now came the part they feared most, moving the mother. She was big, even thin as she was, and moving her might frighten her or cause pain. They needed her to stay calm. One team member kneeled close and whispered, "It's okay. It's okay. We are here to help." They placed the blanket near her body and tried to encourage her to slide onto it. But she didn't have the strength. Her legs barely moved. So the team lifted her very slowly, supporting her body from both sides. The leopard trembled, but she didn't attack. Her eyes were open, watching the cubs. That was her only concern. Once she was on the blanket, the team wrapped the edges gently to keep her warm. The cubs were placed near her stomach, where they felt the familiar heartbeat. Even though the mother was weak, she tried to curl her tail around them. Seeing that small effort, the team felt tears in their eyes. This valley had seen something dark. But this mother leopard was still holding on to hope. As they prepared to carry the family out of the valley. One of the researchers looked back at the strange crater, the melted rocks, the symbols on the stones, and the metallic patches of grass. A shiver ran through their body. Something had come to this valley. Something unknown. And whatever it was, it had left behind fear, silence, and a broken family struggling to survive. But now, help had arrived, and the rescue had officially begun. The blanket felt heavier than expected as the team lifted the mother leopard and her cubs. Not because of weight, but because of the responsibility resting on their shoulders. The morning light was brighter now, making the valley look almost normal. But the team knew the truth. Nothing about this place was normal. Not the ground, not the burned patches, not the melted stones, and not the strange symbols carved into rocks. As they began walking, each step felt like a test. The land was uneven, with loose stones and dried grass that crunched under their boots. They had to move slowly so the mother wouldn't be shaken too much. She was breathing heavily, her eyes half open, watching her cubs with every little breath. The cubs, wrapped inside the blanket near her belly, made tiny sounds that were barely audible. They were too weak to move, but they were alive. And that was enough reason for the team to keep going. One researcher walked ahead, clearing the path. Another walked behind, making sure the blanket didn't drag. Everyone else stayed close, eyes scanning the ground again and again. The strange markings seemed to stretch farther than they had noticed before. Some looked fresh, as if whatever created them had been here recently. Others looked old, as if they had been ignored for days or even weeks. The air felt heavy, not with heat, but with something unexplainable, a kind of tension that made their skin tingle. After walking for several minutes, the team stopped near a higher ridge. From there, the valley looked wide and empty. But the emptiness wasn't peaceful. It felt like watching a place that had seen something it couldn't forget. One researcher pointed toward a burnt circle on the ground. "See that? That wasn't here last month." Another nodded. "And look at the soil. It's like something pressed down with huge force." They kept seeing more details now. Black lines across the grass, as if electricity had run through it. Stones cracked in half, but the edges were clean, not jagged. The team exchanged silent looks, too cautious to speak loudly. Their voices felt like they might disturb something hidden in the valley. They started moving again. The mother leopard let out a soft exhale. It sounded like pain mixed with exhaustion. A researcher placed a gentle hand near her side, careful not to touch her directly, and whispered, "It's okay. We're taking you somewhere safe." Her eyes blinked slowly, as if she understood the tone, if not the words. As they made their way up the ridge, a sudden vibration ran through the ground. It was faint, but noticeable enough to make everyone freeze. The team looked around quickly. The mother leopard flinched, and her cubs stirred fearfully. The vibration lasted only a few seconds, then stopped. The valley fell silent again. One researcher whispered, "Did you feel that?" Another answered, "It came from the crater side." Their hearts beat faster. They didn't want to scare the animals or each other, but something in that valley was alive. Not a creature, but a presence. Something unseen. They decided to move faster. The ridge was steep, and carrying the blanket required careful teamwork. They worked in slow coordination, lifting, adjusting, pausing, checking the animals, then moving again. Sweat formed on their foreheads despite the cool morning wind. Once they reached the top, they paused. From there, they could see the other side of the valley, where the land looked smoother and free of burn marks. It felt like crossing from a strange world back into something normal. The mother leopard tried to raise her head high enough to look around. She was weak, but even in that moment, she wanted to check the surroundings for threats. Her instinct as a protector hadn't died. The team continued walking toward a flat open patch where they had left their small transport vehicle earlier. The vehicle wasn't designed for wildlife, but it was the only way to reach the nearest shelter fast. The path leading to it was narrow, with thorny bushes on both sides. While moving through the path, the team heard another sound. Not a vibration this time, but a faint humming from somewhere deep in the valley. It was low, almost like wind passing through metal. But there was no metal there. The sound drifted in the air for a few seconds, and then faded. The mother leopard reacted. Her ears twitched. She raised her head sharply and scanned the valley with panic in her eyes. It was the first time they had seen fear on her face. The team exchanged worried glances. Something had frightened her. Something she remembered. Something she had seen. One researcher whispered, "Whatever happened to her?" "It's not over." They moved faster. When they finally reached the transport vehicle, the team lowered the blanket gently onto the ground. The cubs clung to their mother, burying their tiny faces into her fur. The mother let out a tired breath, but didn't resist. She was too weak to move, but she didn't look scared anymore. She seemed to trust the people around her. They set up a temporary shade, using a cloth tied to branches on both sides. Then they poured water slowly onto a cloth and placed it near the leopard's mouth. She licked it with difficulty, but managed to drink a little. One researcher sat close and whispered, "You're safe now. No more fear." The cubs tried to move their heads, but didn't have strength. Their tiny paws twitched weakly. The team placed a little food near them, but they weren't ready to eat. They needed warmth, care, and time. As the team prepared the vehicle, another strange detail caught their attention. On the side of the valley, where the land curved inward, there were marks, long, straight, silver lines that glowed faintly in sunlight. They weren't scratches. They weren't cracks. They looked like something had passed through the air and sliced the rock without touching it physically. It made chills run down their backs. They didn't want to stay here any longer. They gently lifted the blanket again and placed it inside the vehicle on the soft padding they had arranged. The mother leopard tried to move her head toward the cubs, making sure they were close. Then she rested again, exhausted. The engine started with a soft rumble. As the vehicle moved, the valley slowly disappeared behind them. But the mystery didn't. The strange markings, the melted rocks, the humming sound, the fear in the mother leopard's eyes, none of it made sense. The road was rough for a while, bumping gently under the wheels, but the team drove slowly to keep the blanket steady. Every few minutes, someone would check the animals to make sure they were breathing normally. The mother leopard's eyes opened at times, then closed again. She looked weak but alive. The cubs stayed pressed to her side, comforted by the familiar heartbeat, even as the vehicle shook a little. After a long drive, they finally reached a safe shelter. It wasn't a big center, just a simple place used for injured animals. But it was calm, quiet, and far from the valley. The team knew it would be the best temporary home for the leopard family. They lifted the blanket again, carried it inside, and placed it on a soft bed of cloth and dried grass. The room was warm, with gentle lights and no loud noises. The mother leopard opened her eyes slowly, looking around. She seemed calmer now. Her breathing eased a little. One researcher sat beside the bed and whispered, "You're safe. Nothing will harm you here." The cubs were moved slightly so they could be closer to her belly. One of them tried to nuzzle her, but its movements were slow and tired. The mother responded by touching it with her nose, a small sign of comfort that showed she still had a little strength left. Seeing that moment, the team felt a sense of relief. They had saved them from the valley. They had given them a chance, but the mystery wasn't over. Outside the room, two researchers discussed quietly the markings they had seen, the strange heat in the soil, the humming sound, the perfect crater. None of it matched anything known. One of them said, "Whatever was in that valley, it wasn't natural." The other replied, "And the leopard must have seen it." They both fell silent after that. Inside the shelter, the mother leopard closed her eyes again, but this time without fear. The cubs rested against her, breathing lightly. The room felt peaceful, a place of healing after days of suffering. But the memory of the valley stayed with everyone, and the deeper truth, whatever had touched that land, was still waiting to be discovered. The rescue center stayed quiet through most of the day. The team checked the mother leopard frequently, making sure her breathing stayed steady and her cubs remained close enough to feel her warmth. The room smelled of clean cloth, fresh water, and a faint scent of herbs the caretakers kept nearby. Everything about the place felt peaceful, a sharp contrast to the strange valley they had come from. As the sun moved across the sky, the light inside the room shifted from bright yellow to a soft orange. One of the caretakers sat on a small stool, writing notes about the leopard's condition. Every few minutes, the caretaker would look up, watching the rise and fall of the mother's chest, checking if she needed anything. The cubs moved slightly, making tiny sounds. They were weak, but warmer than before. When one of them nestled closer to its mother, she opened her eyes, as if trying to stay awake for them. Her body was exhausted, but her instincts remained strong. Outside the room, the team was discussing the next steps. They knew saving the leopard family was only the beginning. There were still unanswered questions. The strange valley, the melted rocks, the symbols on the stones, the deep humming sound. None of it matched anything in the natural world, and none of them felt comfortable ignoring those signs. One of the researchers stood near the window, looking out at the sunset. "We should go back," they said quietly. "Not today, but soon. The valley holds answers." Another shook their head. "It's risky." "You felt the ground shake. You heard that sound. Something is still active there. But we can't just pretend nothing happened." They went back and forth, each side feeling the weight of responsibility. If something dangerous was in that valley, animals weren't the only ones at risk. But right now, the safety of the leopard family came first. They agreed to wait until the mother was strong enough before making any big decisions. Inside, the mother leopard struggled to lift her head. She sniffed the air, sensing something. Maybe it was the unfamiliar smell of the center. Maybe it was fear, or maybe she was simply waking from deep exhaustion. She tried to move her legs, but her muscles trembled too much. The cubs pressed closer, giving her comfort. One caretaker approached with a bowl of water. They placed it beside her slowly, letting her see it clearly. "Here," the caretaker whispered, "drink a little if you can." She stared at the bowl for a moment. Her throat moved as she swallowed. Then she extended her tongue and licked the water, one small drop at a time. Each sip took effort, but she didn't stop. It was the most water she had drank since leaving the valley. The team outside felt relieved when they heard the caretaker say softly, "She's drinking." After a while, the mother rested her head on the cloth again. Her eyes drifted shut, but her breathing was calmer now. The cubs, sensing the change, curled even closer to her side. Hours passed like this. The room stayed peaceful, the air warm, and the atmosphere gentle. Then evening arrived with a sudden change. A deep rumble rolled across the sky, loud enough to shake the windows. The lights in the hallway flickered for a moment. The team froze, their eyes widening. It wasn't thunder. There were no clouds, no storm forming. The sound came from somewhere far off, but familiar. One researcher whispered, "That's the same direction as the valley." Another added, "It's happening again." They rushed outside. The air was still except for a strange vibration that passed through the ground. It was subtle, but real. The same sound, the same vibration they had felt the day they rescued the leopard family. Inside the room, the mother leopard woke suddenly. Her body jerked, and she lifted her head high, eyes wide with fear. The cubs squeaked at her sudden movement. Her ears turned sharply toward the outside, listening, reacting. Remembering. She recognized the sound. Whatever had changed her life, whatever had brought her close to death, it was happening again. The team ran back inside, trying to calm her. "It's okay. You're safe here," one caretaker whispered, but the mother was shaking. Her tail curled protectively around her cubs. Her breathing sped up. She wasn't strong enough to stand, but her eyes were sharp with fear. The room felt heavier, as if the sound had followed them inside. The team gathered near the door, watching her carefully. "She's remembering something," one researcher said softly. "Something from the valley." They all stared at her, feeling helpless. If only she could speak, she might explain what she had seen. But all they had were her reactions and the strange signs the valley had left behind. Minutes passed. The rumbling grew weaker until it faded completely. The lights steadied. The ground stopped vibrating. Everything went silent again, as if nothing had happened. But the mother leopard didn't relax until much later. She stayed alert long after the noise stopped, her eyes fixed on the door dot eventually. Her breathing slowed again, and she lay back down, exhausted from the fear. With the disturbance gone, the team gathered outside the room. One researcher finally said what everyone was thinking. If something returned to the valley, we need to know what it is, and why the leopard was caught in the middle of it. They discussed carefully. They didn't want to risk anyone's life, but they also couldn't ignore the signs. If they understood what the leopard had experienced, they might protect other animals in the future. They decided to visit the valley again as soon as possible, but this time with more equipment and more people. They would examine the markings, take detailed samples, and maybe follow the strange patterns they had seen. Meanwhile, they continued monitoring the mother leopard. The night passed slowly. A small lamp glowed on the table near her, giving the room a gentle, warm light. Every hour, someone would come in, check on her, offer a little water, and adjust the blanket around the cub's dot. At one point, one of the cubs tried to crawl over its mother's leg. It stumbled, nearly falling, but the mother shifted slightly, giving it a place to rest. Even in weakness, she knew how to position herself so the cubs stayed safe. The caretaker smiled softly. She hasn't stopped caring for them, not even once. Around midnight, a new caretaker arrived to take over the shift. They looked at the leopard and whispered, "You're going to make it. You fought too hard to give up now." Outside, the team prepared their gear. Flashlights, cameras, gloves, sample jars, protective suits. They packed everything they thought they might need. The night air was cold, and the world outside the center felt strangely quiet, as if the earlier rumble had drained all sound from the surroundings. One researcher looked toward the distant hills, where the valley lay hidden behind trees and mountains. "Whatever is out there," they whispered, "we'll find it." Morning arrived slowly. Soft light entered the room through the window. The mother leopard was asleep, her cubs resting peacefully. She didn't look as tense as before. She looked tired, but calmer. The team walked inside quietly. They checked her vitals again, feeling a bit more hopeful. She had survived the night. Her cubs had survived too. Once they confirmed she was stable enough to be left under the caretaker's watch for a few hours. The team packed their vehicle and prepared to leave for the valley again. Before stepping out, one researcher stood by the door and whispered, "We'll understand what happened to you. And when we do, we'll make sure no other animal goes through this." The mother leopard didn't respond, but her chest rose in a slow, steady rhythm. The team drove off. The road ahead felt heavy with mystery. What they found in the valley next would change everything. The rescue team worked day and night after bringing the leopard family to the rehabilitation center. No one knew what would happen. The mother was weak, the cubs were frightened, and the strange signs found in the valley kept bothering everyone who saw them. But right now, the main goal was simple. Keep the mother alive, keep the cubs safe, and keep the whole family together. Inside the quiet treatment room, the mother lay on a soft mat. Her breathing was slow and heavy, like every breath needed effort. The cubs curled up beside her, touching her face gently with their tiny paws. They didn't understand what had happened in the valley. They didn't know why their mother stopped walking. All they knew was that she was the center of their world, and they didn't want to leave her. Even the workers at the center felt something in their hearts when they saw the scene. It didn't matter who you were. The sight of a mother fighting for her young always touched something deep inside. The workers gave her nutrients, fluids, and medicines to help her regain strength. One of the experts checked her body carefully and found thin metallic pieces under her skin. They were tiny, almost invisible, but they were not natural. They seemed as if they had been placed there by someone or something that didn't belong to this world. The workers didn't talk loudly about it. They didn't want to create panic or fear. For now, they only focused on care and recovery. Every morning, the first thing everyone saw was the cubs slowly opening their eyes, stretching, yawning, and then looking at their mother as if checking whether she was still breathing. When she moved even a little, they would climb onto her back and rest their tiny heads on her body. These small moments gave the workers hope. They believed that maybe the bond between the mother and her cubs would help her survive. Days passed slowly, but there were signs of change. The mother's breathing became more stable. She started lifting her head. She even tried to lick the cubs, though her movements were weak. The workers cheered quietly each time, not wanting to disturb her. The cubs began walking around their enclosure too. They stumbled, bumped into walls, and sometimes rolled over on their backs. It was a good sign, a sign of life. One afternoon, the mother took her first strong step. She pushed herself up and stood for a few seconds. It wasn't long, but it was more than anyone expected. The workers froze when they saw it. They didn't want to scare her, so they stayed still and let her try. She wobbled, but remained standing for a bit longer than before. Then she sat down slowly. The cubs clung to her legs and purred softly. It felt like a miracle. Every day after that, she seemed stronger. She drank water on her own. She ate small portions. She started watching her surroundings with alert eyes, as if remembering her old instinct. The workers knew that the mother was returning to who she once was, but with visible scars from something nobody fully understood. The metallic pieces recovered from her body were carefully studied. They had unusual patterns that did not match any human-made design. Some parts glowed under certain light. Others produced a faint vibration when touched. But the experts avoided wild claims. They didn't say anything about visitors from beyond, and they didn't mention unusual beings. They simply documented everything calmly. The mother regained enough strength to walk inside her enclosure. The cubs followed behind her like shadows. They tried to climb on her back and sometimes chased each other around. Their playful behavior filled the center with a warm feeling. It was a huge contrast to the cold and lonely valley where the team had first found them. As the cubs grew, the workers noticed something else. The mother seemed protective in a different way. Her senses were sharper. Her reactions were quicker than any leopard they had seen before. She could hear sounds before anyone else did. She reacted to distant noises that humans couldn't detect. It was as if her time in the valley had changed her in ways beyond simple survival. But she was gentle with the workers who cared for her. She didn't show fear or aggression. Instead, she observed humans with a calm, intelligent expression. Weeks turned into months. The cubs became strong enough to climb trees and jump over rocks placed inside their enclosure. They learned how to hunt small moving objects during training sessions. They practiced pouncing, hiding, and stalking. It was all to prepare them for the wild. Their mother guided them naturally. She would crouch low, show them how to move silently, and nudge them when they made mistakes. Her teaching seemed almost deliberate, like she wanted them to be independent. Finally, after long discussions and observations, the team agreed that the family was ready to return to the wild. It wasn't an easy decision. They had grown attached to the mother and her cubs. They had watched them fight through pain, fear, and strange mysteries. But the wild was their real home. The workers wanted them to live freely, without cages or walls. On the morning of their release, the workers transported the family to a safe forest area far from the valley. The place was full of tall grass, clean water, and natural hiding spots. It was the perfect environment for them. When the enclosure door opened, the mother took a step out first. She sniffed the air, looked around, and slowly walked into the wilderness. The cubs followed closely, exploring the new world with curiosity. The workers stood quietly, watching them go. They felt proud, but also emotional. It was like letting go of something precious. But they knew it was the right thing to do. As the family disappeared into the trees, the workers felt a strange sense of peace. Later, when experts looked deeper into the metallic pieces found in her body, they came to a surprising thought. The patterns on the pieces seemed like someone had used her for research or control. It looked as if someone had been watching her behavior, pushing her limits, and then abandoning her when she became weak. It raised questions that no one could answer. Why her? Why the valley? And why leave her in such a helpless state? The mystery remained. No one openly claimed anything unusual. No one connected the strange lights seen earlier with the marks on the ground. But those who had seen the valley and the metallic pieces silently believed that something had happened there. Something that didn't belong to normal explanation. Even though the questions remained unsolved, the story ended with hope. The mother had lived. The cubs had survived. And the family had returned to the wild where they belonged. It wasn't just a rescue story. It was a reminder that sometimes the strongest beings can fall, and sometimes they can rise again with help from caring humans. The workers remembered her as the tough, silent survivor who had come from a place filled with mystery and pain. She was a symbol of strength, a symbol of motherhood, a symbol of how life finds its way, even through impossible situations. And somewhere deep in the forest, the mother leopard walked confidently with her cubs, teaching them, protecting them, and giving them the future they almost lost. The people who saved her never forgot her, and they never forgot the strange valley that raised more questions than answers.